Well, people don't take the idea of sacrifice very seriously. I've looked at the development of the idea of sacrifice in the Old Testament, and one of the things I've come to realize is that one of the great human discoveries was actually that of sacrifice, because it was the discovery of the fact that you could modify the present so the future was different. So it signals the discovery of the future by humanity, the idea of sacrifice, because you become consciously aware, perhaps after acting it out for God only knows how long, that you can give up something that you're deeply committed to in the present, something of extreme value, and obtain something of even more value in the future.
Yes.
And that's the discovery of an entire dimension, the temporal dimension. It's a cataclysmic discovery. It's on the same order as the emergence of self-consciousness. And then mysteries emerge out of that. So, well, some sacrifices work better than others. Well, why? Well, the reaction of being to sacrifice seems to be reflective of the nature of being. And that's definitely the case. Some sacrifices work and some don't, just like some games are playable and some aren't. And so sacrifice has value. Well, then the question starts to become, well, what's of the highest value that you should sacrifice for? And what is the ultimate sacrifice? And well, you can give up something that you own. You can give up something that you love. You can die for something, or you can sacrifice your entire life to it. And it seems to me that in some sense, the latter, the last of those, is the ultimate sacrifice, to give up your entire life for the sake of the highest ideal. And
Right.
that is the ideal of humanity. And then that is the ideal of humanity. And that is what everyone admires. And that's what we all look for in stories. That's what compels us. You said, well, it's the basis of romantic attraction. And I believe that to be the case. That associated with generosity, right? To share the fruits of your sacrifice. And the question arises, well, what is the ultimate sacrifice and what would be the consequences of that? And that's obviously what's being investigated, let's say, in our religious thinking. In the New Testament, there's no doubt that that's what's being investigated. Is there a cosmic significance to the idea of sacrifice?
And I agree with that completely. And I believe that's what is at play when you're making the sacrifice. There's this other element of faith in it. Like the person making the sacrifice is, instead of it just being a negotiation, central to the sacrifice, it seems to me, is a transforming commitment. That the person is being transformed, and what he is giving is transforming. It's like one of the most commonly quoted lines from Braveheart is, "Every man dies, not every man really lives." And I didn't, by the way, it's pet peeve of mine, another line from Braveheart, besides just the scream of freedom that people do, that comes from the film, but is, "They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom." And that quote is on the wall of the United States Air Force Academy, but under it is the name William Wallace, although William Wallace never said that. And I keep wanting to write the English department there and say, "Hey, listen, guys." But where that quote came from was me thinking, okay, is it ego? Is it pride? Is it stubbornness that keeps William Wallace in the dungeon, refusing to submit to the king, refusing to ask the king for mercy and maybe buy time in his life so he can survive a while longer? And the queen, the future queen, comes to him with that offer. And then she says, "You'll die, it'll be terrible." After he has said, "If I submit to him, if I cry out for mercy, then everything that is me is dead already." And she says, "You'll die, it'll be awful." And I was thinking, well, what can he answer to that? And that was, every man dies, not every man really lives. And it became that, and in thinking of, say, Jesus at Golgotha, that if you took a snapshot at Golgotha on the day Jesus was crucified and you said, "Who's the victor in this picture?" you probably wouldn't be inclined to say the guy on the middle cross. But you might if you stared at the picture long enough. You actually might see it. Human beings may recognize that this one here in this way was doing something beyond all understanding. And to me, writing a story isn't just me going, what will surprise the audience? It's, I am being surprised by the story as it's coming through to me. The most notable part of that in Braveheart was I reached the end of the story, and I can see this clearly now, although it was more than 25 years ago. The axe is falling toward William Wallace's throat. And I wrote that on the page. And then I thought, well, we can't see the axe contact his throat and sever his head. What do we see now? And then I thought, well, what about to look at this from the point of view of him? When he knows he has fractions of a second to live, what would he look for? Where would he turn his eyes? Would he look at the axe? What would he do? And he would know that his friends were there. So I wrote, in the last instant of his life, William Wallace turns his eyes to his friends, who were Stephen and Hamish. And I did not know, Jordan, until that instant, that there between them was her, the wife he had lost. And I wept. And I had no sense that anybody else was going to relate to that story. I have a friend named Jack Bernstein, who's a comedy writer. He wrote Ace Ventura, the original Ace Ventura. And Jack is different from me in almost every way. If you put our traits on paper, we're just polar opposites. And he's the one I always take my first drafts to and say, I know this is a mess, but is there anything here? And he read Braveheart, and we sat down to have breakfast and for him to give me his notes. And he said, this is the best thing of yours I've ever read. And I was completely blindsided. I had no sense that anybody would like it, that particularly him, that it had any value. But the story surprised me. And I think, therefore, that revelatory quality was alive. I think it happens in music. What makes music magical is not that it's if it's just the same beat, the same monotony, the same chord changes we've heard, the same lyrics we've heard, it doesn't open us up at all. But when it's just enough different that we notice the difference and are drawn into it. Now, if it's too different, when I was in school and took music classes and they're telling us about atonal this and that and abstract, it had no life, no heart at all. But when I listen to Beethoven, I can just feel the swelling of his heart. And here hundreds of years later,